I want you to try something for a second. Just visualize a word. Just see it really clearly in your mind's eye.
Hmm.
The word is illness. Now, take the letter I right at the front of that word. Remove it completely and replace it with we. What are you left with?
You're left with wellness.
Exactly, wellness. It's like this quiet, almost invisible revolution just hiding inside a single spelling change.
It really is. It's a profound piece of linguistic architecture
Hmm.
because the moment you make that shift from the isolated singular I to the collective we, the concept literally heals.
Yeah.
It transforms from this state of breakdown into a state of flourishing. And, making that shift in your actual life, that requires a complete restructuring of how you operate.
Which is exactly the foundation for our deep dive today. So hi everyone and welcome. We are exploring this fascinating collection of notes and sources today, simply titled Day 88 _essay.docs.
Right, which sounds so unassuming.
It does. But it is this incredibly curated synthesis of wisdom that spans centuries. I mean, it's pulling from an American president, a Stoic philosopher, a competitive golf coach, and a Chinese philosopher, just to name a few.
It's quite the lineup. And it's not just a list of quotes. It's really a coherent blueprint for courage, intention, and, purpose.
Yeah, and our mission today is to take all of these disparate voices and help you, the listener, build an architecture for a life worth living. We want to really look at how isolation burdens us and how that structural shift to we actually carries us. So, okay, let's unpack this.
So to stick with your concept of architecture, we really need to recognize that you cannot build a structurally sound house on a site you haven't surveyed.
You need to know the ground you're building on.
Exactly. So before you can step into that collective we that brings wellness, you really have to figure out what to do with your own individual past. There's this metaphor in the notes from the 19th century English poet Samuel Taylor Coleridge, and it captures this perfectly. He described the light of human experience as a lantern on the stern.
A lantern on the stern, so like the back of a boat.
Right. If you picture a ship sailing through the darkness, the lantern is hanging on the back of the boat. It's only illuminating the waves behind us.
Which, I mean, that sounds incredibly poetic. But what's fascinating is how this applies to really high-stakes modern environments. The text brings in Tony Dungy's approach, the football coach, his approach to Monday morning film reviews.
Yes, the film room.
Right. So when a professional team sits in a dark room watching the tape of Sunday's game, they are basically looking at Coleridge's lantern.
They are.
But the mechanism of why they do it is the crucial part. They aren't watching the tape to, wallow in a missed tackle or to feed their egos over some great touchdown.
Right. Film review strips the emotion entirely out of the past.
Exactly. It just uses the illumination of what just happened to calculate the precise angle of the path forward.
And that is the perfect way to look at it, because the raw data of the past only becomes useful when it's distilled into courage.
Courage.
Yeah. There's this brilliant parallel drawn here with a biblical story of Joshua. So Moses has just died. Joshua is suddenly tasked with leading an entire nation into unknown, hostile territory.
Talk about pressure.
Right. And he doesn't get a strategic roadmap. He doesn't get a tactical plan. He just gets a repeated command delivered 3 separate times. Be strong and courageous.
Yeah, and the text asks a great question here, like, why the repetition? And why courage instead of, a map?
Because Joshua's lantern was already blazing.
Oh, right.
Think about it. He had decades of lived experience. He watched the Red Sea part. He saw the walls of Jericho fall. So the courage he needed wasn't some, mystical force he had to conjure out of thin air.
It was just the logical byproduct of looking at the lantern on his stern. But look, I get the appeal of drawing strength from past victories. But if I'm driving a car at 60 miles an hour and I'm constantly staring at the rearview mirror, I am going to crash right into whatever's right in front of me.
Oh, sure. Absolutely.
So if this architecture requires us to constantly analyze the waves behind us, how do we avoid the trap of just living in the past?
Well, what's fascinating here is that the text anticipates that exact trap.
Yeah.
The trap of overanalyzing. And it's why it brings in Robert Greene's work on mastery to explain the underlying mechanism.
Okay.
Because the goal is absolutely not to stare at the lantern forever. The goal is transmuting that past rational knowledge into pure intuition.
Intuition.
Right. Greene brings in Einstein for this. Einstein famously called The intuitive mind is sacred gift, and the rational mind, its faithful servant.
The servant and the gift.
Yeah, and think about how completely backward our modern culture is regarding this.
Mhm.
We worship the rational, analyzing servant. We want a spreadsheet, a metric, a quarterly report for literally everything. But we completely neglect the sacred gift, which is intuition.
Well, 'cause intuition feels unscientific, right? It feels like you're just guessing.
Right, it feels risky.
Mm-hmm.
But true intuition isn't guessing. It's actually the highest form of processing.
How so?
The deepest form of intelligence comes from immersing yourself so deeply in your past experiences, like staring at the lantern during the film review, that the rational knowledge physically alters your neural pathways.
Oh, wow.
Until it becomes an intuitive feel. You stop consciously thinking about the steps and you just know the movement. Confucius grounds this perfectly in the text. He says, knowledge without practice is useless. Practice without knowledge is dangerous.
Right.
So the lantern gives you the knowledge. The courage pushes you into the practice. And the fusion of those two creates an intuition so sharp, you no longer have to look backward to know where you're going.
Okay, so the lantern provides the sight survey, and the courage gets you to pour the foundation. But once you have that intuitive wisdom, how do you actually start building? Because the sources argue pretty strongly that wisdom pursued in total isolation eventually hits a ceiling.
It does. It absolutely does.
And this is where the structural necessity of shifting from I to we comes into play. It's the difference between a lone bird exhausting itself and a flock traveling thousands of miles.
Seth Godin's analysis of birds flying in formation really illustrates the sheer evolutionary mechanics of this.
Yeah, the V formation.
Right. When a flock of geese flies in that V formation, it isn't just a nice visual of teamwork for a motivational poster.
Right, right.
It's an architecture of radical aerodynamic efficiency. The bird at the front is breaking the wind, creating this upwash of air that makes flying significantly easier for all the birds behind it.
But that lead bird can't sustain that friction forever.
No, they die. So the flock constantly rotates leadership. And that rotation is not a sign of weakness. It is the fundamental strength of the system.
The system is stronger than the individual.
Precisely. The system protects the individual, allowing the collective to achieve a velocity and a distance that would literally kill a solo bird.
So you're never truly flying alone, even if you think you are. You're embedded in an industry, a family, a community. Your formation dictates your trajectory. Miguel de Cervantes nailed this centuries ago. He said, "Tell me thy company, and I'll tell you what thou art."
Yes.
Because if you're flying with a flock that constantly descends, your individual intuition isn't going to save you from hitting the ground.
Right.
And for anyone in that lead position, the one breaking the wind, John F. Kennedy's philosophy is really vital here. Leadership and learning are indispensable to each other.
Oh, that's such a good connection.
Right. In a healthy formation, the lead bird is learning from the flock's drafting patterns just as much as the flock is relying on the leader's direction.
Absolutely.
But here's where it gets really interesting. I want to build an analogy for you, the listener, based on a concept in the text from Adam Robinson. He talks about inhalation and exhalation.
Right, because it's easy to misunderstand the flock concept.
Exactly. It's really easy to hear this and think, great, I just need to surround myself with people 204/7 and completely dissolve into the group. But think of your periods of deep focus. Your solitary preparation is taking a deep breath in.
That's the inhalation.
That's your inhalation, stepping out into your community, joining the formation and sharing your talents. That's breathing out. That's your exhalation. You can't just relentlessly exhale without suffocating. You have to breathe in.
And that rhythm, that in and out, that is the pulse of any strong architecture. Your participation in the we is only sustainable and only valuable if you've taken the time and solitude to develop something worth sharing. You have to cultivate your own structural integrity in the quiet moments. Otherwise, when the flock rotates and it's your turn to take the wind resistance at the front,
You just collapse.
you instantly collapse under the pressure and you actually endanger the entire group.
Okay, so let's say you've done the solitary work. You've breathed in. You're strong. You're in the formation, and the group is moving. How do you handle the psychological pressure of the actual destination?
That's the big question.
Because the text makes a massive pivot here regarding how we view success. It argues that to really perform at the highest level, you have to completely surrender your control over the outcome.
Yeah, and this brings us to the concept of being in the zone, which is beautifully illustrated by Os Hillman in the notes.
The golf story.
Right. Hillman, who's a competitive golfer, describes a day he shot a 4 under par 68 in his club championship.
Which is incredible.
It is. And the psychological mechanism behind that phenomenal performance was not an aggressive, white-knuckled obsession with the scorecard. It was the exact opposite.
He let go.
He focused entirely on executing the correct swing mechanics in the micro moment, radically trusting that if the swing was structurally sound, the outcome, where the ball actually landed would simply take care of itself.
So he wasn't playing the course, he was playing the swing. And Hillman maps this onto two opposing frameworks for decision-making, the Greek model and the Hebrew model. Putting aside any theological debates, just looking at them as frameworks.
Right.
The Greek model is essentially the modern corporate cost-benefit analysis. We evaluate every single action by its projected outcome. If I invest X amount of energy, will I get Y return on investment?
Yes, the classic ROI.
But the Hebrew model flips that entirely. It's about acting on trust first, executing the right action, and understanding the outcome later. Going back to Moses at the Red Sea, he didn't sit on the banks running a risk assessment matrix.
No, he didn't.
He didn't demand a guarantee of dry land before he moved. He just raised the staff.
He trusted the action.
But wait, hold on. I have to call a timeout here.
Okay.
If I'm a CEO or honestly even just someone managing a family budget and I walk into a room and say, hey, everyone, we're abandoning the cost-benefit analysis. We're just going to trust the swing and see what happens. I am going to be fired or I'm going to go bankrupt.
Oh, immediately, yes.
Yeah. Right. So in a modern world obsessed with metrics and KPIs, isn't abandoning outcome-based thinking completely terrifying? I mean, it sounds like a recipe for driving your life off a cliff.
Well, this raises an important question, and that exact reaction is why this concept is so frequently misunderstood.
Okay.
Let's unpack the mechanism of the Hebrew model, because it is not blind, reckless faith. To explain this, the text brings in the author Ryan Holiday, who examines this through the lens of ancient Stoicism. Holiday writes, "The best revenge is to exact no revenge at all." Now, on the surface, that sounds passive, right? Almost weak.
Yeah, like you're just giving up.
But it's actually a stance of immense psychological control. You are choosing to focus your entire cognitive load on living morally and executing your own character, rather than bleeding energy into a reactive spiral trying to control someone else's punishment.
You're executing the moral swing, regardless of the immediate scorecard.
Precisely. And this is where Confucius brackets the entire concept to answer your CEO question.
Right. The practice without knowledge is dangerous, end quote.
It's exactly. Stepping into the zone, or operating under this model of radical trust, is not a license for unprepared leaping. You cannot abandon the cost-benefit analysis on day one. You transcend it on day 1,000.
So it's earned.
Completely. The zone only becomes a mathematically safe state after you have engaged in so much rigorous, deliberate preparation that your execution is basically flawless. The CEO doesn't ignore the market. The CEO has studied the market so obsessively that they can make a split-second intuitive decision without needing a committee to draft a 50-page projection.
You earn the right to trust the swing.
Yes.
That's the missing link. You don't start with radical trust, you graduate into it.
Exactly.
Which brings us to the actual machinery of this whole architecture, the habit engine.
Right.
Because how do you survive those 1,000 days of preparation so you can finally enter the zone? You need a relentlessly consistent engine humming in the background of your life. And the text opens this section with Aristotle's definitive axiom. We are what we repeatedly do.
And, we now have the modern neurological data to back up Aristotle's philosophy.
Yeah, David Schwartz.
Yes. Schwartz points out that a staggering 95% of what we think, do, and achieve is simply the result of learned habits. 95%.
That is wild.
It's an automated response system. Let's look at the cognitive mechanism of why this matters. Schwartz argues that your attitude and your thought management dictate success far more than your raw brain power.
Okay, how so?
Well, if you have a fact person, someone with immense raw intellect but terrible mental habits, they spend all their cognitive load fighting their own procrastination, their bad attitude, and their disorganization.
So their engine is just constantly stalling out.
Exactly. But an idea person with a highly tuned habit engine has automated their discipline. They don't waste brain power deciding whether to work or how to respond to a setback.
The engine just handles it.
The engine handles that automatically, which frees up their conscious mind entirely for creative problem solving and high-level execution.
The essay even looks at the Ten Commandments through this structural lens. And again, putting aside the theological debates for a second, just looking at it strictly as the oldest, most battle-tested habit architecture in Western civilization.
All right, as a framework.
It's a civic and social operating system designed over millennia to help human beings live with integrity and communities to function without tearing each other apart. They are the foundational habits beneath all other habits. If you have that architecture in place, you're ready for Elmer Letterman's famous definition. Luck is what happens when preparation meets opportunity.
I love that quote.
Right. You didn't just stumble into success. Your habit engine was idling, fully fueled, long before the opportunity ever walked into the room.
Which perfectly explains Roberto Luongo's definition of resilience here.
The hockey goalie.
Yeah, the legendary goaltender. He says it doesn't matter how many times you get knocked down. It only matters how many times you get up.
Which we've all heard before.
Yeah, right. But within the framework of a habit engine, the mechanism of getting up is different.
Right.
The goal isn't to rely on a sudden burst of emotional willpower to drag yourself off the mat.
Because willpower depletes.
Exactly. Willpower depletes.
Yeah.
The goal is to make the physical and mental decision to get back up so deeply ingrained in your neural pathways that it requires zero conscious deliberation.
Oh, wow. It's literally a software update for your soul.
That's a great way to put it.
If you pre-program your responses to failure, you don't have to manually write the code for your emotional reaction every single time you miss a target or lose a client. You just run the get back up script. It fires automatically.
Yes.
But you can't optimize an engine if you don't know how it works. Greg Harden, the legendary performance coach, says the only way to write that code is by becoming the world's greatest expert on who you are.
Right.
You have to know your own triggers, your own weaknesses, and your own capacities.
And once that engine is optimized, you really start to see the trajectory Henry Ford described. Ford operated on incredible long-game thinking. He believed that those who aim for the best, prepare for the best, and try their best will eventually find that things turn out for the best.
Which sounds like blind optimism, but it isn't.
No, it's not blind optimism at all. It is the calculated, structural reality of someone who understands that the arc of a highly disciplined, automated habit engine naturally bends toward flourishing over an extended timeline.
Okay, let's step back and look at the blueprint we've assembled here.
Let's do it.
We have the lantern of experience giving us the site survey. We have the formation providing the scaffolding and the team. We've practiced enough to trust the swing and enter the zone. And we have the habit engine powering the daily build. Where does this architecture ultimately lead? The essay pulls all these elements together by asking the final defining question posed by Coach George Raveling. What was I made for?
That is a heavy question.
It is. And Raveling points out that answering this requires immense introspection, and more importantly, the courage to violently reject the stereotypes and limitations placed on you by others.
Right. And Raveling provides 3 core practices to ensure the legacy you're building actually matters.
Oh, are they?
First, he says to loosen your grip. Stop interrogating life. Stop constantly rehearsing worst-case scenarios and trying to control outcomes that haven't even materialized yet.
Trust the swing.
Exactly. Second, treat your life like poetry. This means applying deep intention to your daily actions. A poet doesn't waste syllables. You shouldn't waste days. Every action should be a deliberate verse.
I love that.
And third, you must understand what remains at the end of the timeline. When the money, the titles, and the trivial anxieties fall away, the only structural elements that survive are love, kindness, and human connection.
Which brings us full circle to why the shift from I to we unlocks everything.
It does.
Benjamin Franklin had a wonderfully blunt metric for evaluating your legacy. He basically said, if you don't want to be forgotten as soon as you are gone, you have 2 choices. Either write things worth reading or do things worth the writing.
That is so blunt, but so true.
Right. You must contribute to the formation. You must add more aerodynamic lift to the flock than you consume. Jim Cathcart condenses this entire philosophy into 2 words. Aim high. Because the future you visualize and prepare for today is the exact person you are actively becoming tomorrow.
If we connect all of this to the bigger picture, the profound realization of this entire document is that making the shift from I to we is not a surrender of your identity.
No.
Because a lot of people fiercely protect their isolation because they fear that joining the collective means becoming a faceless cog in the machine.
Right, losing yourself.
But the mechanics of this architecture prove the exact opposite. Entering the we is the fullest possible expression of the self. It requires an individual who is strong enough to be vulnerable,
Yeah.
skilled enough from solitary preparation to actually take the wind resistance at the front of the flock, and wise enough to know that a legacy that matters cannot possibly be constructed alone.
It's the ultimate paradox. You have to perfect the I before you can truly contribute to the we.
Exactly.
But as we wrap up this deep dive, I want to leave you, the listener, with one final, deeply provocative thought from the text to examine. Amidst all this discussion of habit engines, aerodynamic efficiency, and structured routines, there is a quote from the 19th century philosopher Henri Frédéric Amiel.
Oh, this quote.
Yeah, he wrote, "A belief is not true because it is useful."
Let that sink in.
Right. I want you to take Coleridge's lantern and shine it on the architecture of your own life right now. Look at your habit engine. Look at the formation of people you're flying with. You probably have routines, assumptions, or even relationships in your life right now that feel incredibly efficient.
You feel highly productive.
They feel useful, they get you through the day. But if you are brutally honest with yourself, are those useful materials actually grounded in truth? Are they structurally sound?
That's the real question.
Because you can build a highly efficient house using cheap, useful materials, but if the foundation isn't fundamentally true, the entire architecture will eventually collapse under pressure. If you want to take the I out of illness and permanently step into wellness, you cannot build your we on a foundation of useful fictions. You have to build it on the truth.